Hi, I'm Jess Chermak, one of the co-founders of Virtual College Counselors.
And I'm Sawyer Earwood, the other co-founder of Virtual College Counselors.
So we collectively have gotten into college counseling from the exact opposite ends of the college counseling spectrum. My background's forensic psychology, and I'm a licensed professional counselor. And
my background tends to be in college admissions. So I worked in an admission office for a little over 4 years. And aside from that, I'm just a voracious reader and consumer of information and love learning about education.
Yep. So we received some questions that we would like to answer. The first question is, how do I figure out what I want to do in college and with my future? Great question, such a loaded question. There is no cut and dry answer to that question, but what I can say is the majority of students in the US go into college undecided, and the vast majority change their major at least once during college. The percentage goes down as you change your major repeatedly, but there's a pretty high percentage of students who change their major more than 3 times. So not knowing at 17 what you want to study or what you want to be is perfectly acceptable and makes perfect sense. Also, you're still a teenager.
I mean, that's the thing I think a lot of people forget is that if you ask most people what they wanted to do when they were like 17 or 16 or even 15 years old, most of them were radically off from what they ended up doing. That's something that when I was working in college, a lot of college students struggled with was you put a lot of hard work and effort into a major. You think that major is going to like directly tie to your career. But spoiler alert, your major does not necessarily tie with your career. And oftentimes you can meet quite a few very successful people who studied something completely unrelated to what they ended up doing in college. Mine is not necessarily completely unrelated, but I was a history and international studies majors and focused in East Asia, specifically on China. That helped when I was doing international recruitment. But for the most part, like if we think about like a knowledge base of like history and international study and policies, not super relevant to what I do right now.
Yeah, my background too. I mean, my background's in psychology, which certainly comes into play here. Not so much the forensic psychology piece outside of the clinical setting, because we don't typically have too many students who are, in the criminal system right now. But the majority of people don't actually use their degrees. And I think something that students don't realize before you get to college is your major, the degree that you're getting, is only about half the courses that you need to take to be eligible to graduate from college. So we encourage students to explore and be flexible and decide to change your major and go to your career center and talk to all of the adults in your life about their careers. I think it's also important to know that some jobs that exist today won't exist in 5 years. And there's certainly dozens, if not hundreds of jobs that will exist in 5 years that we can't even fathom in this moment. So again, perfectly fine to not know what you want to do or where you want to go or who you want to be. But there are some pretty good starting points.
Yeah, I was about to say, so to the students and parents out there, to specifically answer the question, how do I figure out what I want to do with my college and future? Generally, what we recommend and what we work with students about is not discovering a major, but discovering a passion, right? Most students are passionate about something. When we ask, what's a topic that you could just lose yourself in for hours, just like go down a Wikipedia rabbit hole and like not emerge and realize you've lost like 2 or 3 hours. Something we talk with students about, and usually they're like, okay, well, I don't really like, and what academic class might that be? It doesn't have to be an academic class. That's the beauty of college is you have a lot more opportunity to study a lot of different things, and you have a lot more opportunity to pull in your interests from outside to really kind of learn and create an interdisciplinary approach to life and your career. So when we talk about figuring things out, you need to find out what do you enjoy? What like makes you excited? What creates that passion inside of you? Because if you can start pursuing that and find some way that either that specific subject or even just a specific skill set you use, if you are a people person and you don't really care what you do with that, but you want to work with people, then that is where we can begin to hone and focus in on giving you chances to experiment and see what really connects and what maybe you thought looked good on paper, but ultimately like didn't feel awesome when you actually did it.
And I think, I mean, also students don't realize there are colleges out there where you can create your own major. There are colleges that don't have any majors. There's colleges that don't give grades. There is a college, at minimum, a college for everyone. And like, we want you to have the flexibility to explore different subject areas and combine those studies into something that you're interested in. You're living in the generation of not being confined to the box. We're not the type of students anymore who are going to go to college and find that one career and stay in it for the rest of your life, or at least not that one particular job. That's a very rare occurrence these days. And it's nice to know that you can actually major in anything and do anything. You do not need to study political science or criminal justice to go to law school. You could study chemistry and go to law school. That's what my brother-in-law did. You could also, you don't have to study science to go to med school. You can quite literally study anything. And that honestly looks better for med school because you will have like a more well-rounded education.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Move on to the next question, which is an important one. Where do I start with the college application process? How do I stay organized? So I'll answer how do I stay organized first, because I cannot emphasize this enough. Excel sheets, which sounds like such a rudimentary, in a world where everything has an app, an Excel sheet seems really like prehistoric and archaic, but it is going to be the best way to stay organized. You can keep track of notes when you do your research on colleges. You can keep track of what is the cost of each college. Do they offer certain majors you're interested in? What size, location, graduation rates? You
deadlines.
Deadlines. All this information that's online, you can find for free. And then you can create your own little college list and college list database. That's really the best way. And then you just keep adding more and more to it. And by the time you're done, you'll have a really awesomely informational, like robust spreadsheet that quite frankly, you could probably give to a younger friend and they could reuse that same kind of idea. And so I would say that would be my first suggestion, is when we talk about staying organized, Excel sheets, because you can put deadlines in Excel sheets, you can put requirements, you can put ideas. It's only limited by your imagination. Now, where do you start with the college application process? Kind of similar. You start with research. And by research, I mean, like, literally just start looking at colleges. And by looking at colleges, you can go on their website. You can look on like any number of websites that collectively grade these colleges in some way, shape, or form. You can look on their social media, ask parents, ask professors or teachers or coaches that you admire, where did they go to college? What are some cool colleges? And just start kind of keeping a list, and in your spare time, look at them. It's kind of fun because it's kind of like window shopping. So like, it's very much no strings attached right now. You're not like marrying any of these colleges right off the bat. You have plenty of time to do like research and kind of feel them out.
Yeah, and I think so most students wind up starting the search geographically. So depending on where you're living, you might want to be a certain distance from home, or you might want to be a certain distance from an airport. There might be certain parts of the country or world you don't want to study. That's usually the easiest way to narrow down the list of colleges. There's about 4,500 colleges in the US alone. It's a lot. And you have to start somewhere. And sometimes it's saying, hey, I don't think I could handle the snow in Minnesota or the humidity in Florida. And that rules out, a few hundred schools. So that's usually a really good place to start. And I think another good place to start when thinking about this college process is just avoid looking at rankings, because the rankings are pretty arbitrary. I think a lot of students and families don't actually understand what goes into those rankings, but it's often 6-year graduation rates, alumni donations. It's a peer assessment from people who have never even heard of that college. There's a lot that goes into it that's entirely meaningless for the students, and like how the student might benefit from an education at that particular school. So just because a school has a high ranking doesn't mean it's a better school for you. And if it has a lower ranking doesn't mean it's not a good school. So honestly, starting with it, like at bare minimum, Google Images. Think of the schools that you've heard of in TV shows and movies. Granted, those are the ones that tend to be a lot more difficult to get into. But also start exploring like what's near you and what's in areas that you might have like family or family friends. Always a great place to start because you have at least, a support system in place in those locations. And when you're looking at schools, when you're actually like physically going to campuses to look, it's often really helpful to just visit like your local state school and a local private school, a big school, a rural school, or an urban school. If you can just visit one of a school in those different categories, you can get a sense of what the other similar schools might feel like. Not every student's able to visit any colleges, and we don't recommend necessarily visiting all the colleges you want to apply to before you apply. You can always visit once you get in, but that's also a great place to start, is just sign up for a college tour and information session at a local school. That'll give you a really good sense of what college is about. A lot of those information sessions and tours overlap with the content that they share. So you can get a pretty good sense of what exists. So the next question, what should I do when thinking about which college to go to? I think we kind of covered that a little bit, and that question's definitely a lot easier to answer one-on-one when we actually know a student. But some of the things to consider is, do you care if you're taught by your professor or a graduate student? Do you think you can thrive in a classroom of 600 or 200? Or do you want that like personal relationship with your professors where you can ask questions in real time and feel supported? And if you're missing class, they're texting you, asking if you're okay and what they can do to help you. There are just so many opportunities out there that what's really important is to figure out what you need in a school, what fit looks like for you. So that's financial fit, academic, social, cultural, anything that makes you you. Like, what do you need to be successful? What do you need to be happy? As long as you're checking those boxes, then it really doesn't matter where you go. What matters is what you do with it and what you do there and how you engage. So I think that's probably the most important thing when thinking about which college to actually go to.
Yeah, I couldn't say it better myself. It's all about college fit. It's about defining what is fit for you, all those different categories. What are the best college essay writing methods? So that's a really interesting question because every student's going to write differently and every student's going to think differently. But I can give you a couple ideas of what I do when I work with students. So really quick off the top of my head, first of all, on our blog, on our website, shameless plug, virtualcollegecounselors.com, you can actually find quite a few essay exercises. So they're meant to be a little bit more fun and engaging to kind of help students explore like what values are they bringing, what ideas are they pursuing, who do they want to be in the future. So that's a good place to start for some self-exploration because most essays are going to require some introspection. The tried and true method that I use with almost every student, once again, sounds archaic and rudimentary, but there's a reason why these methods have stayed around so long: outlining. Most students, I don't think, understand the power of a really good outline. If you do an outline properly, you can essentially write your entire essay and then delete the outline, and you've got a pretty good essay remaining as a rough draft. And when you think about it, just think about it like you're building out a puzzle, right? You're fleshing out this essay. You have introduction. And what are you going to do in the introduction? You're probably going to have a hook. You're going to have some kind of sentence or structure establishing a context for what you're talking about. And then some type of like a thesis or a roadmap so the reader knows where they're going so that they are more engaged. And then you're going to have a mix of examples and anecdotes and stories combined with your personal values, your beliefs, and your insight. Usually a lot of growth over this opportunity. And then you kind of tie it all back together in the conclusion. You kind of tie it up in a nice bow. You talk about maybe where you're going to go in the future from this point. And that's really the basic outline of most college essays. And they don't have to be 5-paragraph essays, but oftentimes it's easier to start that way for students because that's how kind of high schools teach us to write. But then as you begin to really get into the groove and you start making that essay your own, you can really be quite creative with it.
I think it's also important to kind of understand what the college essay actually is. It's really just a piece of you on paper. It's the only time the admission officer can actually connect with you. So your application will have your transcript and your activities list and, where your parents went to school, if they went to school, and like a bunch of background information. Your essay is your real only chance to show your personality, and showing personality and authenticity is what allows the person who's reading your application, who has never met you before, to actually hear your voice and connect with you. So there's a few things we want to do in a college essay. You want to highlight some of your values. That can be done through telling stories. It should be done through telling some sort of story. But in the grand scheme of things, there's two different types of college essays, and that's it. There is a narrative essay and a montage essay. If you want to know more about these types, we have some of those blogs that Sawyer was mentioning. The college essay guy also has a bunch of free resources. His name's Ethan. He's amazing. We use a lot of his materials too. We love working with him. His methods are great. He hosts free workshops. But the idea is that you can tell a narrative story, right? Where boy wizard turns 11, finds out he is a wizard, goes off to wizarding school, all these things happen, then he goes home, right? One straight through story. Another way, though, to highlight your values is to kind of bring in multiple stories with either a connecting theme, so where you're highlighting the same value in different ways, or you're using different stories to kind of share different pieces of who you are in a creative way. That can oftentimes be a lot easier for students because then each paragraph is kind of its own story. So it's shorter and sometimes easier to write. But it really depends on what your topic actually is. And right now, for example, the common application, there's 7 prompts, but the last one's share anything. So we like to go in without prompts. I want you to actually think about who you are, what's important to you, what do you know a lot about, what do you love, and that's what you should write about, because if it's easy to write, then it's probably going to be easy to read. And I think a lot of students don't realize when you submit your applications, you're going to spend hours and hours and hours, so many hours working through this process. And the person on the other side of the desk will spend 4 to 7 minutes reading it. Yeah. So knowing that they have very little time to read your letters of recommendation, your transcript, your application, like background stuff, and your essays, probably makes sense to write about something exciting. You want to get that hook at the very beginning to make sure that the reader keeps reading. And as long as it's something that's exciting to you, it can be very exciting to the reader as well, even if it's something they have no interest in.
Yeah.
So next question, do I have to mention strengths and weaknesses in my essay? No.
Yeah, no. And if anything, so oftentimes we'll actually get back sometimes some pushback from usually parents, where a student will talk about a time that they grew. And so something that a lot of people forget is to show growth, you have to show where you started. You can't just show where you ended. Like we don't just see the hero walk out with like all the spoils of his adventure and then we're like, oh, well, okay, that's cool. I guess he's a hero and we respect it. No, the hero has to start somewhere that is usually an underdog story and then grow and accumulate all of this. And then we really respect and connect with the hero at the very end. So when we talk about strengths and weaknesses, I can't really think of an opportunity where you ever need to like specifically like a robot list strength and weakness. But it is fairly common to show growth. So like if you were a very rigid child, like you needed a schedule, you needed a structure, and if something didn't go to plan, then like you lost it and cried and threw a temper tantrum. That's obviously not a good light. But that's not the point of the essay. The point of the essay is we're showing where you were, so then we can provide a story to how you became more flexible, how you became a little less rigid, maybe how you came to come to terms with the uncertainty of life. And then we show where you are now, which is the part where we're highlighting. So no, strengths and weaknesses don't have to be in every college essay. Not every college essay even has to be about growth, but if they were to appear, usually it's in the terms of like a growth story.
Yeah. And the idea of strengths and weaknesses, I don't really like the word weakness because they're really just opportunities for growth. And if you can frame it that way, it's a lot easier to write about. But also like there are certain topics that we definitely recommend avoiding because they're overdone and it's really hard to make a unique essay. And I can promise you a lot of admission readers will not finish reading your essay if you started out with this topic. One of those that comes to mind, and we have a whole list in one of our blog posts, so you can check that out. The like primary one that comes to mind is that like sports essay where like say you're on a team and you're either the worst player on the team but you persevered. Don't write that story unless you have something very compelling to share about it. Or overcoming a sports injury to then, win the big game. They're so overdone. It's very difficult for students to think outside the box and share something that's particularly unique. And the whole idea of this essay is this is your only chance to really stand out in the pool of applicants. If you're applying to good fit schools that are, a good fit for you academically, odds are other people are also applying with the same grades and scores and course rigor, similar extracurriculars. Like what makes you stand out is going to be your essay. How do you process the world? Who are you on paper? And if you could find those unique ways of framing those things, then it can be very successful. But some students also do a lot better not writing about strengths and challenges. You don't have to have lack of better words, a sob story to have a compelling narrative. Sometimes that can work. Like if that's a really salient, important piece of who you are that you want to share with the reader, that's totally fine. But again, like some of the best essays are about these seemingly mundane. One of my favorites is about, a small, like a child going to the farmer's market with her grandfather and the growth in that like excursion that they did every week. You can really write about everything, and you do not need to actually write about strengths and opportunities for growth.
So we also received a particular question about kind of engineering. So students that are interested in engineering, how do we get started on that path? What can set you up for success? There's really quite a few different ways we can talk about this, but I want to start with high school level, because a lot of the success of like an engineering student can be determined in the high school level. That doesn't mean that it's impossible for somebody who's not like super interested or taking high level math, but especially for more competitive programs, you're going to want to make sure that you are taking really strong math courses. You're going to hopefully have some type of engineering extracurricular or course. Not available to all students, but even something as simple as a Habitat for Humanity build. If your class doesn't offer any courses on engineering or any engineering clubs, like a Habitat for Humanity build is something that you can definitely turn into a strength, because you are building a house. You're learning about these fundamental ideas of structure, how to use these tools. But you need to make sure that you are showing the college that you are ready for that kind of a program, because at the end of the day, a college admission counselor's job should be accepting or not accepting a student based off if they believe they can succeed or not at their school. That is kind of, I think, at the root of what everybody is thinking of in admissions if they're doing their job properly and ethically. So when, let's say I'm an engineering major kind of reader, and I'm looking at engineering students, one of the things I'm going to look at is, has this student taken enough courses? Are they serious enough about their academic work? Have they taken courses in math and science that are rigorous, so that when they enroll in our program, we know they are going to be able to succeed? Because we don't want to admit them and then have them fail, because that does a disservice to the family and the student, but also to the institution. So thinking about the high school level, it's a lot about those courses, making sure you're demonstrating your academic strengths. And ultimately, if you can, trying to find ways to incorporate engineering outside of the classroom. So robotics club, getting internships or doing shadowing programs, summer camps.
Those are like advanced math classes that like maybe are now offered at school.
Right.
Most competitive four-year engineering programs want to see students having taken calculus already. So if you've taken calculus as a sophomore in high school, you should probably be seeking out other opportunities for math and science and other things that are like a lot more related to engineering. I think one thing that like really should be emphasized is you can't cut corners to get into these schools. There's too many incredible students out there and incredible applicants that if you show up with something that is a completely different path without a good reason, then you will have a much more difficult time getting in, because they won't be able to visualize how you might be successful on campus or how you might contribute, because you won't have had the experiences that a lot of the other students have had. I think one of the questions was about like, is it possible to like get a GED instead? And I would say if you want engineering, I would not go the GED route if it's avoidable. If you have a reason for getting a GED instead of staying in school, that's a whole nother story. And that's something that like, I think it would be worth an actual phone call, more personalized phone call to actually talk through what that looks like. But we also get some questions about like technical school, community college, four-year schools. There's also 3+1 programs or 3+2 programs for engineering. So very briefly, we're going to break that down for you. So Technical college, typically only about 2 years. There aren't many that are just like direct engineering technical colleges, but there are things relating to engineering you can do in a technical college, like learning about UAV, like drone kind of stuff, for example. Same with community college, you get your associate's degree. Some community colleges also offer some bachelor's degrees. And sometimes like you can get an incredible like nursing education at these community colleges, which is awesome. Good way to save money. Then there's a standard 4-year university, of course. And then there's these additional programs that are like these dual degree programs. So a lot of small liberal arts colleges don't offer engineering. There's a handful that do, but they're highly competitive. The ones that don't oftentimes have partnerships with really great engineering schools. So you do your first 3 years on that main campus, and then during that last year, you're applying to the engineering program at the other school. But there is an agreement with that school that if you meet certain criteria, you will be admitted. They hold spots for students. So that you can wind up going to a place like, Rhodes College in Memphis, Tennessee, and then connect to like WashU in St. Louis for engineering.
Yeah.
There are pros and cons to programs like that. Going in, knowing you're only there for 3 years can certainly change how you interact on campus, how you make friends, all of that stuff. You also might change your mind, and that's okay. So we would want to make sure that you're at a school that you really love for those first 3 years, just in case you decide you don't actually want to go somewhere else for the last 2. The major con, I would say, is financial aid.
Yeah.
Your financial aid from that original institution likely won't transfer to the other. And as a transfer student, and the schools that you're able to do that +2 in tend to be more expensive. There's way less funding. So if money is a concern, that might not be the best route. Alternatively, there are also 4+1 programs where you do your whole 4 years and you take that 5th year and get your master's degree. So it cuts off a year of what like you would typically have if you graduated in 4 years and then went straight to a master's degree. So you start that graduate level work in your senior year of high school. Senior year of college. But I think that probably answers most of the questions. Do you have anything?
No, I think it does. I think the one thing I would say that makes engineering a little bit different than a lot of the other majors you might see is that you are almost certainly going to need at least a master's if you want to get a significant engineering career or program. It's not always the case. There are obviously exceptions along the way, depending on what engineering you want to do and like what's your actual experience level. But most like when we're thinking of like a standard, safe, stable corporate kind of like environment, they're going to look for those higher degrees. So if engineering is something that you're interested in, I want you to be aware of the fact that that will almost necessitate going to a master's program at bare minimum. So you will have a little bit of a longer journey, and that's something you probably want to keep in mind. It's not always the case, but a vast majority of those really what I would say cushy, and by cushy I mean like stable, solid job pay, good benefits, like a company that's not going to fall under. All of those are going to require a master's or higher, most likely.
Yeah, but I think that answers all of the questions, and hopefully we see you at the panel.
Yes. If you have any more questions, you can check out our website. We have a bunch of free resources on there. We also have a lot of blogs that tackle a lot of the subjects we talked about today. And if you have any specific questions, feel free to shoot us an email. You can find our emails on the website, www.virtualcollegecounselors.com, or send us an email. And even if you don't want a consultation, if you just have an interesting subject you want to learn about, we can write a blog about it. And that way, not only will you get your answer, but I'm sure there are hundreds of others, if not thousands, that also have that same question. But thanks for listening to us. We hope to see you in the future.
Bye.